in what the whole
Sylvie. Bring it in a bucket now. Bring it in a bucket, Sylvie. Every little once in a while.
Sylvie come running, bucket in her hand. She will bring a little water fast as she can.
Bring me little water, Sylvie. Bring me little water now. Bring me little water, Sylvie. Every little once in a while. Can't you see me coming? Can't you see me now? I will bring a little water every little once in a while. Bring me little water, Sylvie. Bring me little water now. Bring me little water, Sylvie. Every little once in a while.
Once in a while, won't you bring me little
Bring me little water, Sylvie. Bring me little water now. Bring me little water, Sylvie. Every little once in a while.
Once in a while, won't you bring me little water, Sylvie? Bring me
little water now.
Bring me little water, Sylvie.
Every little once in a while.
Greetings and welcome. Welcome in person. Welcome to those joining us online. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so excited to be here with you. Welcome to Mount Vernon Unitarian Church. I'm the Reverend Christian Schmidt. I'm the interim minister of this congregation. And whether this is your first time with us, your 1001st, whether you're in person, online, watching this later, you are welcome. We are glad to have you here. We have, of course, experienced a number of, what's the right word here? Challenges over the last 2 years, and found a lot of ways to overcome those and adapt and change. And so this is the latest iteration of that. We're doing multi-platform worship, welcoming people in whole new, wonderful ways. We're very glad that we can provide this forum in all of those ways, to find comfort, to recommit ourselves to the mission of supporting one another in our spiritual journeys, to working for justice, caring for the earth, and building the common good. We gather in whatever way we can best do to recommit ourselves to dismantling systems of oppression and injustice, something I'll be talking about quite a bit today. It is good to be together. In addition to be restarting in-person worship today, we also have some other things starting that I'm really excited about. In particular, our current session of religious education starts today at 11:30 for ages 5 to 18. We'll be using the Our Whole Lives. Yes, Anne is very excited. We all are. We're using the Our Whole Lives human sexuality curriculum, which usually we sort of do for 1 or 2 age levels, but we haven't had a chance to do it in 2 years because of logistical issues. So we're doing it for all ages, and we're super excited about that. Is there anything else I need to say about that? Come, bring people. Lastly, please continue to look to all the means of communication, to emails, to phones, to our website for information about what's going on here. And know if you're ever in need, we're just an email or phone call away. So I invite you now to take a deep breath with me, in and out, as we enter into our time of worship.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Until All Means All by Erica A. Hewitt. The chalice, as a symbol of Unitarian Universalism, arose as a beacon of hope in an atmosphere of tyranny. The chalice arose as a sign of promise that the marginalized would neither be forgotten nor ignored. Because they are beloved and precious from the perspective of the holy, this morning we remember all the people who have been told explicitly or implicitly through police violence or government policy, through derision or dehumanization, that they're anything less than whole, anything less than beloved. As we each light a chalice in our homes, may we make of our lives a beacon, a symbol of our promise to draw the circle wide, a sign that we will not rest until all means all.
I would like to invite you all to rise and body your spirit and sing joyfully and loud, Enter, Rejoice, and Come In. It's number 361 in your hymnals.
Open
I invite you now, as we unite our voices, to speak aloud the covenant of our community. These words are both known within our heart and are displayed upon your screen. Love is the teaching of this church. The quest of truth is its daily task, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve life in community, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony. This is our covenant with each and with all.
Good morning. My name is Ann Richards, and I'm the Director of Lifespan Spiritual Growth here at Mount Vernon Unitarian Church, and I am so glad to be here with you. I am so glad to be here with you all this morning. This morning we have a song story. It's This Little Light of Mine, which you may know, and we're going to hear it with our choir later in the service. And I wanted to introduce it for you because in RE, we've been talking about symbols and metaphors when one thing stands for another. And in this song, I think this little light of mine, that little light that we all have, means whatever is really good and really special. And in our story today, we have illustrations from E.B. Lewis, who tells a whole nother story about a little boy who doesn't hide his life under a bushel. A bushel is like a basket. He doesn't hide his light, he lets it shine. So take a look at this. This Little Light of Mine, illustrated by E.B. Lewis. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Hide it under a bushel? No, I'm gonna let it shine. Hide it under a bushel? No, I'm gonna let it shine. Hide it under a bushel? No, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Won't let no one blow it out. I'm gonna let it shine. Won't let no one blow it out. I'm gonna let it shine. Won't let no one blow it out. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Good morning again. My name is Glenn Sheffield. I'm a member of this congregation. Mount Vernon Unitarian Church continues to share the plate with committed organizations that you, our members, have chosen. During the month of April, Our offering is being shared with Rising Hope United Methodist Mission Church. Rising Hope is more than a hypothermia shelter on winter nights and more than just a church on Sundays. Volunteers and staff serve hot lunches several days a week, year-round, to homeless, low-income people in the Hybla Valley area. Twice a week, they run community food banks. In the warmer months, weekly fresh produce distribution. People are welcome to sit in the dining room and use the restrooms and water fountains during church office hours. The congregation's membership is drawn in large part from its clientele. Because Rising Hope welcomes people for daytime respite, the church office is available to provide other services that are difficult to find for homeless people. Limited mail service, mail receiving services, phone messages, a limited phone use for those who do not have cell phones. These services lead to a long list of benefits for clients who need them. It gives clients a street address for mailing statements, SNAP benefits, Medicare, Social Security, bank bills, paychecks, and other matters of daily life that otherwise they wouldn't have. Rising Hope's street address is accepted by the Department of Elections for voter registration and by Department of Motor Vehicles as one form of proof of Virginia residency. This allows clients to register to vote and to obtain or replace state photo IDs. An official mail that is a street address means that clients can apply for housing, medical insurance, SNAP benefits, open to or access a bank account, and look for employment. Being reachable by telephone means they can keep in contact with Social Security services workers who are helping them with work, housing, and psychological issues. We are a community that invites spiritual and material generosity for our members and friends. I want to talk about me given time. For many years, I've wanted to get more involved, but was reluctant due to work. I recently retired and now have the time to give. My friends asked me what I was going to do. Will you miss nursing leadership? I was wondering about that myself, but I'm finding that MVUC has so many opportunities to share my skills with. You may be surprised or not that nursing provides skills in leadership, planning, and process improvement. I am now exploring these opportunities in the social justice and worship committee arenas, besides still participating in teaching RE, the OWL program, and singing with the choir. It gives me pride to be able to use my skills and feel like I have a great deal to contribute to our community. I invite this gathered community to offer whatever you are most comfortable with in spirit and financial generosity for the mission of our church community. If you would like to write and mail a check for the offering, please make it to MVUC, and in the memo line, indicate how you would like it to be used. You can also follow the link in the chat box to make a one-time or recurrent payment. We are so grateful for your donation.
I invite us all to prepare for a time of silent meditation followed by spoken. Get those wiggles out. Get comfortable where you're seated. And join me in a time of silence. Our spoken meditation today comes from the Reverend Elizabeth Wynne. It's called Loving the Ark. God, who is with us in the courtrooms, at the border, in the streets, in the struggle. We do not know if this ark bends towards justice. The great test of our Unitarian Universalist faith is not whether we believe we can bend the ark, but how we are when the bending looks oh so differently from what we expected. When we're met with swear words when we expected songs. When we're met with a group of white people talking about white identity when we expected multiracial community. When we're met with a people of color space when we expected multiracial community. May we know the sacredness of people of color space, the holiness of white people supporting each other, and the power of cursing at injustice. When our efforts feel frustrating and hopeless when we expected to see outcomes. When our people's bodies are dying in the streets and we have no idea how to be all right. When our people's spirits are dying from the grinding violence of white supremacy. When the era of Ferguson becomes the era of Baltimore, becomes the era of Charleston, and we don't know what is next. When we've been in this work for 6 years or 6 decades, and we look around at our congregation or our local police or our schools or our prisons and have no idea what justice could look like. Our faith teaches us 2 truths: that we are always enough, that the great circle of love casts no one out, and that we are responsible for bending our small piece of the ark, for finding our own racial justice front lines. And when we find our front lines, we find not only our hope, but we find our most effective action. UU writer and theologian Kenny Wiley says in his Unitarian Universalist Black Lives Matter theology, right now we are being called by our ancestors, by our principles, by young black activists across the country to promote and affirm, you are young and black, and your life matters just the same. You stole something, and your life matters just the same. I've been taught to fear you, and your life matters just the same. The police are releasing your criminal record, and your life matters just the same. They're calling you a thug, and your life matters just the same. There are no exceptions. Black Lives Matter is universalism in practice. May it be so. I invite you to remain seated as we sing once again, this time, Find a Stillness, which is number 352 in your gray hymnal.
Find a stillness, oh, a stillness,
Today's reading, called Racist or Anti-Racist, is by the writer and activist Ibram X. Kendi. He writes, ironically, Americans who self-identify as not racist, whether they're conservatives, moderates, liberals, radicals, progressives, they don't realize that we are connecting ourselves to a history of slave traders who self-identified as not racist, though they might not have used that term. We're connecting ourselves to enslavers who said, yes, when we say black people should be enslaved, when we say slavery is a positive good, when we say slavery is a necessary evil, when we say that black people are the cursed descendants of Ham, those aren't racist ideas. That's God's law. That's science's law. That's nature. That's logic. We don't realize we're connecting to Jim Crow segregationists who said, I'm not racist, it's separate but equal down here. You can't tell it's separate but equal? We're following the law, we're not racist. We're connecting to eugenicists, who were really the first group of Americans to be classified as racist, who also turned around and said, this is science. This isn't racism, this is science. We have empirical data to demonstrate that black people are intellectually inferior by nature. Just look at their test scores. And today we have white nationalists. We have white supremacists who self-identify as not racist. We have white supremacists who, before they go into a Walmart in El Paso, Texas, write a manifesto claiming that Latinx immigrants are invading Texas and claiming, I'm not racist. We have this long history of racists classifying themselves as not racist. Racists who cannot imagine that they have been reinforcing notions that there's something wrong with a particular racial group. Racists who can't imagine that the policies and policymakers they're supporting are creating and reproducing racial inequity. Fundamentally, racism, its heartbeat, has always been denial. And the sound of that heartbeat has always been, I'm not racist. To be more specific, the sound of that heartbeat has always been, not racist, not racist. And so in writing How to Be an Anti-Racist, his book, I've had one singular goal. If I could somehow shape the world, what I would hope would come out of this book is very simply we would eradicate the term not racist from the American vocabulary. And then it would force people to recognize they're either what? Racist or anti-racist. It would force Americans to recognize that all policies are either racist or anti-racist. All ideas are either racist or anti-racist. And then we can truly have an accounting of ourselves, of our ideas, our policies, our country. Because at some point we are going to have to stop denying that we have metastatic racism. Because if you didn't already know, it's literally killing America. It's literally killing this world. The three lethal weapons that are threatening American existence and human existence are, of course, nuclear war, climate change, and bigotry. And so ends our reading.
let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. My God gave it to me. I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, yes, now. My God gave it to me. I'm gonna let it shine. Hallelujah, people. My God gave it to me. I'm gonna let it shine. In my home.
So as you may or may not know, we plan worship weeks, in some cases months out ahead of time. And so I didn't think much of doing this sermon on this day when we're gathering together again, when I planned it a while back. But this week, as I was writing it, I was like, could have picked a little more upbeat topic, right? And that's really tempting, because frankly, it's easy for me to go through my whole life without dealing with racism if I don't want to, right? I'm white, I'm male, I'm relatively well off financially, though there have been days. I, in fact, did a little research on that. As of now, at least, my household is comfortably in the top 10%, maybe even the top 5% of wealthiest households in the world. I don't feel that way on a daily basis, I gotta tell you, but that's because I don't have to face that reality most of the time, right? I'm pretty well educated, I'm able-bodied, I'm heterosexual, I could go on here. In short, I have a lot of very privileged identities, and when you have those, you can ignore or just not have to deal with racism or most oppressions. Pretty much all the time. I gotta tell you, the one time I really felt it, I was in Japan, and Japanese people on the whole do not think white people are better than them. In fact, they think the opposite. They think anyone who's not Japanese is sort of unfortunate, honestly, that you weren't lucky enough to be Japanese. And I gotta tell you, that was a really strange experience for me because, again, for the entire rest of my life, I've never had anybody treat me that way. So anyway, when you have these privileged identities, you can ignore or just not have to deal with racism, as I said. But that's, of course, not the reality for most of the people on the planet, not even most of the people in our communities. And we, as people of conscience and faith, cannot ignore that. Our congregation, indeed, has committed itself not to ignore that reality, and moreover, not just to not ignore it, but to do something about it. So I want to talk about privilege for just a second. I sort of mentioned it, but I want to be clear. I often hear the argument from someone that, for instance, being white has not helped them at all. They're still poor, they've been discriminated against, etc. And so what privilege means is not that you won't face discrimination or be held back in your life, or that you won't be denied opportunities. It's just that your identity, again, as for instance white, hasn't been the thing holding you back. And I'm sure someone will bring up some instance of what they call reverse racism, which is a very strange term, where being white has hurt them. But I think we're past the point of dealing with that as if it were a serious argument. There are mountains of evidence that certain groups in our society are marginalized because of their identities. So there's several ways one can approach dealing with this reality. In our reading, we heard about one, which is the prominent one historically and even today. You can ignore this reality or deny it. Sort of two sides of the same coin there. This has been a very popular strategy for many, many centuries. And it's so clear, I'm not even really sure I need to give examples. There's a second approach, which is that you can say there is something fundamental, genetic or cultural or otherwise, about oppressed or marginalized people that makes and keeps them that way. And you've probably heard this one too. This is what IQ tests and phrenology, which again Kendi mentions, which was those weird head measurement things from the late 1800s and 1900s that were supposed to prove that different races were fundamentally different. It's all junk science, just to be clear. Or you can bring up certain various stereotypes of marginalized groups, right? And I don't even want to dignify those by repeating them, but they're very well known. And all of this is just junk. So there's, of course, a third approach, which is that you can do something about this reality. And this is the one we, as a congregation, as individuals, have chosen. Not to say we do it perfectly all the time, but we're trying. In fact, it's probably clear from what I've been saying today that I think this is the only ethical way to approach this reality. That is that we have to dismantle structural racism and oppression. To paraphrase Kendi, if you're not anti-racist, then you're racist, at least in the sense of participating in and benefiting from, or I suppose being harmed by, structural racism. Now let me unpack that quickly too. What is structural or systemic? Both these terms are used. They're not identical, but there's a lot of overlap. What do those words mean? And this really matters, because I think the popular face of racism is someone screaming epithets or refusing service to a person of color at a lunch counter or something like this. This is overt personal racism, the kind where a person or group of people commit what we might call an act of racism. Structural and systemic racism work differently, and they're actually much more powerful in many ways. They refer to systems or policies that advantage white people and or disadvantage people of color, often while never mentioning race explicitly in any way. For instance, there is, the practice of redlining, in which mortgage loans are denied for neighborhoods that are primarily black or people of color because those neighborhoods are, quote, risky. If you don't believe redlining has affected your life, it has. I absolutely guarantee you. Or to give another example that my mother liked to talk about. When she started working in city government, the department she worked for had a long-standing policy of promoting from within. And so this was in the 70s, as more people of color, and a lot more women too, it should be noted, were hired into entry and lower level positions in that department, the policy suddenly changed to instead prefer outside candidates for management positions. In other words, without ever saying those words, they didn't want to hire people of color or women, so they changed the policy. And you might find yourself saying, what does this all have to do with Unitarian Universalism, other than our commitments, which are really important? I have a lot of answers to that, including those commitments which really matter, but one of them is this. I want to read you just an excerpt of a fairly short piece from my friend, the Reverend Nathan Ryan, who serves our church in Baton Rouge, which is the largest city in America that is primarily black. It's called Our Faith's Complacency and Racism. He writes, "We have an absurd amount to learn or unlearn about race in this country. America allowed slavery to exist by seeking out personal and regional salvation at the expense of universal salvation. Our country felt better about itself because with the South as the identified patient, as the problem child, it never had to look at its own addiction. In the pre-emancipation South, most whites and almost all blacks were poor. Only a handful of plantation owners held virtually all wealth. The North, including many cities led by Unitarians, spread their share of the stolen enslavement money via cotton and sugar and shipping sales into factories and productions that, while partially benefiting the rich, also supported middle and working class white people. And much of our faith's amassed wealth, not so much in this congregation, but certainly in our more historic congregations, there are some gigantic endowments that come from a lot of sketchy money. Where was I? Much of our faith's amassed wealth came this way. Worse, our Unitarian forebears justified keeping this money by perpetuating the mythology that we were the good, anti-racist part of the country. And so in addition to having an absurd amount to learn or unlearn about race in this country, we also have an absurd amount to learn and unlearn about our faith's complacency in this racism. We as a faith have benefited and continue to benefit directly from a system that garners wealth and safety at the expense of black people. So far, our faith has not done the work to unlearn the mythologies that perpetuate cultural supremacy in this country. Although many of the terms make some of us uncomfortable, it makes me uncomfortable to say it, I will admit. We must notice how mythologies that go wholly unexamined in our faith are in actuality perpetuating systems of oppression. We must dedicate, he closes, we must dedicate ourselves to building a new system of radical universalist inclusion that loves all people. And so it is these truths and more that have led some of the leaders of our movement of Unitarian Universalism to make a bold proposal that our principles, our beloved 7 principles we have held in the UUA since the 1980s, and those were an update of previous principles, that these 7 principles need an addition, the 8th principle. So let me give a tiny bit of context. The UUA's principles are what the 1,000 or so member congregations of that group, including this congregation, have committed to. They're a statement of our values and aspirations. You've almost certainly heard me and others use their language, even if we didn't tell you that's where it was from. Language like affirming the inherent worth and dignity of all people, or talking about the interconnected web of existence of which we are all a part, or our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. All of this is language directly from those principles. The 8th principle, the proposed 8th principle, says, we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote, journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. Let me repeat that. We commit to journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. So a quick aside, one of the reasons I'm talking about this today is that I want to give you a preview and hopefully an inspiration to come to a workshop on May 7th, led by Paula Cole-Jones, who is one of the creators of this 8th principle. We're hosting it. It's a virtual workshop. You'll see a lot more information about it in the next few weeks. I really, really would encourage you to come. In any case, the 8th principle makes clear our anti-racist commitments. And some people have said that might seem unnecessary to even say, because it's tempting to think that we don't need such an addition to our principles, that the principles we already affirm are enough. After all, they include affirming the inherent worth and dignity of all people, as I said. They affirm the interconnectedness of all life. Surely that alone would cover being anti-racist. And yet somehow we haven't solved that. As Reverend Ryan's reading reminds us, the history of our congregations and our movement is checkered at best when it comes to race. We have to do better. For all our marching in the civil rights movement, and let's be real, there were plenty in our churches that did not support that back then. We have spiritual ancestors who supported eugenics or made money off investments in slave ships. Even today, we pride ourselves on being welcoming, but we are overwhelmingly white as a denomination in a country that no longer is. We can't allow that to continue. So this then is why we have to be clear and precise about our commitments and why we need the 8th principle, in my humble opinion. And one of the things I love about the eighth principle proposal, which is part of a proposal of revising the entire principles that the UUA is considering right now, and why I support it unreservedly, is that it doesn't merely oppose racism. It doesn't even just call us to dismantle it, though it does both those things. No, it calls us to build beloved community. And I've already said this to you, especially if you were here in August for a sermon I gave, but I want to quote some of my own words from that sermon. In the proposed eighth principle, we see the same pairing, not just opposing racism, but also the vision of beloved community. Let me take a moment to tease that out. We use the term beloved community, which Martin Luther King Jr. used prominently, which he got from the philosopher Josiah Royce. What does that mean? It means a vision of people living and being together in peace with justice. It means an end to oppression. It means the flourishing of each and every human life and all of our lives together. I'm not sure that any of us living in a world as broken as it is today can fully grasp what that would look like, but the good news is that we can get closer to it each and every day. As a parent, I have to remind myself of this all the time, that it's not enough to stop a bad behavior, not enough to tell a child to cut it out, though sometimes, of course, that's all we have time and energy for. Ideally, we have to pair it with showing our children a positive vision of who they can be and what they can do, what hopes and dreams we have for them, and what hopes and dreams of their own they can nurture. Because life is not about avoiding the bad stuff, though that's a good thing to do. It's about making sure that we can save or create good stuff. So friends, we are called to make the beloved community, to be anti-racist, to dismantle racism and oppression, to be not just racist, but anti-racist, to say it one more time. And this stuff matters. May it be so. I would invite you to rise, or body or spirit, and sing Break Not the Circle, number 323 in your gray hymnals.
Please join me in saying the words of our chalice extinguishing. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are gathered again.
Our benediction today comes from Robert Kaufman. He writes, "We have come together to share our deepest concerns, speaking and singing words of inspiration and hope. We have committed ourselves to do what we can to ease the burdens of those who suffer, to stand for decency and compassion. We have pledged to work for a more wholesome environment for us and for all the generations that will follow. But these are just words. The hymns we sing are just songs. All our reflections are just idle thoughts. When we convert them all into loving and responsible action throughout the week, then and only then will this morning become what we want it to be. Truly a time of worship. Our worship has ended and our service begins. Please be seated.